So when we do PDA, one of the things people ask me is, what are the key tools that you use? You've seen some videos where we've spoken about the search frame, we've spoken about some of the other mechanisms that we use, but here is the most powerful and the most important. Once you have set a team on its task and the team is essentially started up, they've identified their problem, they've broken the problem down, they've gone through the AAA exercise and they've identified their entry points and they've identified some points of action. They then move into the first push period where they're pushing themselves to do new things. And we would say that period should be a couple of weeks, no longer than that, especially at the beginning, because you're trying to build momentum. You don't want it to be longer, you don't want it to be shorter, because shorter means you can't really do anything. Longer means that you just kind of lose that momentum and people go into established habits of putting things off till tomorrow. Once you get to the end of the 2 weeks, you want a check-in period. And the check-in period is the most important thing in every iteration, because it's the point where the iteration comes to the end and you say to people, how did it happen? What happened? And you ask 4 basic questions. And the 4 basic questions are questions which we ask sometimes to the individuals, always to the teams. We have them write down the answers and then we have them get together and talk about their answers. And here are the basic questions. The first one is simply, what did you do this last push period? In these last couple of weeks, what did you do? And we try to contrast what they did or compare what they did to what they said they were going to do. And we're trying to firstly ensure that everyone is accountable, that what they said they were going to do, that they actually tried, right? We also try to see whether or not there's something interesting or exciting that came out of it that we call emerged from this, that they didn't know about. And that is something that usually really inspires people when they can talk about things that they did that they hadn't planned for 2 weeks ago, because it's almost something that's new for them. It's novel. Novelty is exciting. So what did you do is the first question. The second question is, what did you learn? And this is where you're moving away from accountability. This is not a test, and this is not just something you're doing to get them into trouble. You're saying, okay, you tried that thing, it didn't work out as you thought, so what did you learn about that, right? And this sometimes gets people a little bit uneasy at the beginning, because no one's ever asked this before. When they've been asked, what did you do? It's usually by someone wielding a big stick and trying to get them into trouble. And now you say, well, okay, you weren't successful, but what did you learn? And the discussion of this is more important even than the writing, at least at the beginning of the PDA process, because people aren't used to answering this question. I'm sure that you yourselves have been looking at this in your own iterations, and when you think about what did you learn, you're kind of scratching your heads and thinking, well, what really could that be? Well, let me give you some examples of things that we found out. In one country where we were working, the teams decided that their first step was to go and get more data. And so they identified 3 organizations to get data from, and they said, we're going to put a request in for the data. And 2 weeks later, we came back and we said, what did you do? And they said, we requested the data. And they said, and did you get it? And they said, no. And we said, well, what did you learn? And they said, we don't know. And they said, well, you learned that the request doesn't work, right? So they said, oh, we did. We learned that the request process doesn't work. So then we get to the next question at the bottom. We say, well, what's next, right? What's the next thing that you're going to do? And they say, well, maybe we're not going to do the formal request process. Maybe we're going to call them. That's a great idea. And if that doesn't work, what should you do? Maybe you should go visit them, knock on their door. And they said, oh, that's interesting. You see, you do, you learn, you adapt. And this mechanism helps you to do that. So you go, what did you do? What did you learn? What's next? And you'll see my order is a little bit strange because we're being adaptive. And then the final one is you go, what are you struggling with? And what are you struggling with is really important. And for all the managers out there, I'd say this is the most important question that you can ask your people. Because oftentimes managers in a delegation mode will say, what did you do and what you're doing next? Let them learn and let them communicate what they need your help with. Let them tell you why it didn't work. If you don't give them the option to do that, they're going to hold it back and it will keep them from the next step. And we find that this unlocks a lot of things. What are you struggling with? They start to speak about their fears about what's going to happen in 3 months' time. We often find that they start to tell you about the kinds of things that the authorizer needs to help them with. And this then tells the authorizer what their job is moving ahead. Now, these 4 questions are not questions that you ask once. They're questions you ask at the end of every iteration. And at the end of every iteration, people come together and they're very short questions. You can see these don't require an essay. They require a couple of lines each for each person. They come together, they share the lessons that they have, and you start to find some exciting things that happen, especially as you move over time. What we find is that a lot of the teams start to use these questions in their day-to-day lives. And especially with one of the teams I'm working with at the moment, actually, a team in South Africa, they came back and they said, we found that it doesn't matter if we fail, if we're doing it in a tight iteration, and if we're reflecting on what it is that we did, because it gives us the ability to do it differently in a very, very short amount of time and to learn about our mistake and to rectify it. These questions, tremendously powerful, tremendously simple, tremendously quick.